My name is Sabrina and I'm 18 years old. You guys love Halloween, don't you? Well, I hate it. And even more so after what happened last time. I always thought Halloween was a silly excuse to dress up and scare. Plus, an invention of companies to sell more. Not that I'm a hater, but do you know how much garbage is generated each year with costumes, decoration, and everything is thrown away to buy more the following year? Anyway, due to my ideas, I've had problems with some friends who are huge fans, but I've got it all figured out. What I never thought was that I would also end up losing my boyfriend, and a couple of other things. We had been together for a few months and everything was going great. Until he suggested I should go to a costume party at a friend's house on Halloween night. I had to sit down with him and explain what I was thinking. He freaked out, didn't understand how I couldn't like a celebration like that. He tried to convince me and we ended up having our first argument. But luckily, we settled. He said he understood and respected me, but he wanted to go to the party if I didn't mind. I smiled at him and gave him a hug. Of course I didn't mind. So that was my plan for the night. Staying home alone watching series. I got a good bowl of popcorn and my favorite blanket. From time to time, my boyfriend would send me messages to see how I was doing and pictures of the party to make me jealous. I admit that part of me had regrets, but deep down I knew I wasn't going to have a good time anyway. I took the precaution of turning off all the lights in the house so that it would look like there was nobody there and so the children in the neighborhood wouldn't come to bother me asking for sweets. At first it worked, and although I could hear the fuss outside, I was relaxed. I even fell asleep with the TV on, until someone rang the doorbell and woke me up all of a sudden. I didn't bother to open the door. At that time, it could only be one of those kids. A few moments passed and the doorbell rang again. That drove me crazy, and I got up ready to give them a hard time. But suddenly, I heard a sharp knock on the door, accompanied by other noises. The first thing I thought was that they had realized that I was at home and they wanted to play a joke on me, like a trick-or-treat. But what if they weren't children? It sounded like they were trying to break in through the door. But a thief, the night of Halloween, what a coincidence. Nah, for sure it was a joke. Luckily, the noises stopped and peace reigned again. I tried to forget by turning on the TV again, but I couldn't help telling my boyfriend. He volunteered to come, but I didn't want him to leave the party because of some nonsense of mine. Suddenly, the TV went off and the house was dark. I tried to turn on the light, but it didn't work. Could it be that someone had disconnected the electricity from outside? The joke had already gone too far. I told my boyfriend and he told me not to worry, that he would be here soon. This time, I didn't try to dissuade him. I was really getting scared. I wanted to think rationally, but the first thing that crossed my mind was to get something to defend myself. In my house, we don't have baseball bats as people do in American movies, so I grabbed the closest thing there was, an umbrella. Great, I was ready to face the pinwin. I went around the house, illuminating with my phone light, and I didn't see anything weird. In the meantime, I was reading messages from my boyfriend. He was trying to reassure me that he was on his way, but that I shouldn't leave my room. I was much calmer. When I returned to the room, I was surprised to see a light through the door. It was the TV turned on again. Luckily, maybe it was just a power cut. But I froze when the screen went black and there was a very high-pitched squeak. Without giving me time to think, a hand appeared in the image, pointing behind me. Holding my breath, I turned around. From the shadows appeared the sinister figure of a man who rushed towards me, screaming. Despite my fear, I had the cold blood to react and give him a knee in the crotch with all my strength. The attacker fell to the ground in pain, and I began to hit him like a mad woman with an umbrella on his head. He started begging me to stop, and I seemed to recognize his voice. I illuminated him with the phone and saw that it was my boyfriend. I realized it was a joke. The anger and resentment I felt was so big that I hit him a few more times. The umbrella was broken, but it proved effective as a weapon. My boyfriend had a gap in his head that wouldn't stop bleeding, and the floor and couch were splashed like there had been a slaughter. I helped him get up to get into my car and took him to the hospital, while I kept telling him that he deserved it for doing such a stupid thing. The outcome of the night was blood stains all over the room and the car, and my boyfriend breaking up with me, saying I was a psychopath. Also, I left my house door open, and now we were robbed. No wonder I hate this holiday. My Halloween sucked. Hello, horror lovers. Today, we bring you one of your favorites, another supernatural story. To give you context, this story takes place in Wyberton, a town located in the southwest of Boston, England. It is a calm and isolated area, surrounded by farm fields. Frederick was doing an internship at a school in Wyberton to do his practice as a teacher, and also to learn a new language. He remembered the first day as if it was yesterday. He arrived on a Monday, and as soon as he left his suitcases, the principal welcomed him to guide him during the workday. When Frederick saw the principal, he couldn't help but notice a very tired expression on his face, and the pale tone of his skin highlighted even more the purple of his eye bags. What impacted Frederick the most in his first class was the silence. It was so quiet he could almost hear everyone's heartbeats. The students had a discipline and serenity he had never seen before. As soon as Frederick went into the classroom, the principal asked him to introduce himself. Frederick wrote his name on the blackboard and briefly talked about who he was, his studies, and his hobbies. Then came the time for him to start the class, and when he least expected it, between the nerves and how well he was feeling working as a teacher, he was startled by the sound of the alarm, which indicated the end of that class. Once more, the principal came to Frederick to guide him to the next classroom where he would teach his next class. Frederick introduced himself again, and the morning really flew by. All the teachers had lunch together, as it's tradition on the first day of school, and all of them had the same pale skin and bags under their eyes. Frederick simply assumed that was common in Wyberton's townsfolk. And then, when he wanted to say goodbye to go back to his room, thinking that some of the teachers would go to their respective houses, strangely, none of the teachers in that school lived outside the building. Frederick spent the entire afternoon locked in his room. Night came without him realizing it, and in the morning, all the teachers would be called early to start teaching their respective classes. He prepared all the content for the next day and went to bed. He then started to think about how weird everything was feeling, how it felt like time was passing at a different pace in that place. He didn't see anyone through his window all day, even though it faced in the same direction as the building's main gate. Then Friday came. He couldn't sleep well any of the previous nights. He was very tired and needed to clear his head. So, after finishing his first week of work, he thought he would feel better if he had a walk around the town. Strangely, he didn't find anyone in the hallways after dinner. Frederick still headed to the main gate, reached the lobby, grabbed the doorknob, but it was locked. He looked for the principal in all the offices, but he was nowhere to be found. Where could he be? Frederick kept searching for the principal but couldn't find him anywhere, and thus decided to head back to his room. On the way back, his neck started to itch, and when he scratched it, he noticed a 2-point bite. Ah, damn spiders, he thought. He opened his bag, looking for the mirror his mother gave him to see if that bite was infected, but he couldn't find it. He was absolutely sure he brought it with him. And that's when he realized that he had not seen any other mirror in the entire building. The itch from the bite started getting worse, but Frederick decided to just go to bed since it was already dark. Maybe he would find someone to help him in the morning? Well, many hours passed and he couldn't sleep. He really needed to go on a walk. He put on a coat and went back to the main gate. It wouldn't be difficult to jump over it. And just when he was about to jump, he heard the voice of the principal asking Frederick where he was going. Frederick turned around, telling the principal that he needed to go for a walk. The principal said, "You can't go out. The transformation hasn't started yet. Seeing that Frederick didn't understand what was happening, the principal took out the mirror Frederick had been looking for and put it in front of him. Frederick couldn't believe it. His reflection wasn't appearing in the mirror. What was happening? He looked again at the principal, and all of a sudden, he saw himself surrounded by huge numbers of pale people with purple eye bags, including his students. He had no other option than trying to escape. He tried to jump the gate, but they managed to grab his ankle, making him fall on the floor instead. The last thing Frederick saw before closing his eyes were fangs covered in blood approaching him. Hello again, horror lovers. Today we'll be sharing with you the return of a very well-known ancient legend, especially in Spain. A long time had passed since we heard episodes of people bumping into this specter. And those who have experienced this terrifying adventure say that it always happens at night, in the middle of desolate roads, always at the outskirts of cities and towns. Nacho had been spending the night at the birthday party of one of his best friends. At first, he said that he would leave at 8 p.m. He was far away from the city and had an exam the next day. However, the party stretched out until 3 a.m., which is when he finally decided to head back home. Nacho drove carefully through the highway while drinking coffee. He was exhausted and couldn't allow himself to fall asleep. He turned on the radio, turned up the volume to the max, and put on his favorite playlist to try and make the trip a bit more bearable. But suddenly, he visualized something white at the horizon, right on the long and straight road in front of him. A bit puzzled, he thought that maybe it was just his imagination. He shouldn't be driving when he was exhausted. He continued driving, but slowed down the car until he could clearly see whatever that figure was. As he got closer, the figure of a woman dressed in white started to take shape. She was standing right in the middle of the road. Nacho stopped by her side and rolled down the window, thinking that maybe she had had an accident and needed help. With an expression of shame and shivering due to the cold, that beautiful young woman asked if he could take her to Madrid. Nacho nodded and told her to get in since he was heading to Madrid too. She opened the door, sat in the back seat, and Nacho continued driving. Nacho tried to make conversation with the young woman, but she remained silent and with her eyes fixated on the road. He would nervously look at her through the rearview mirror, and he just couldn't understand what was going on with that silent and unusual passenger. They eventually reached a part of the road right before a sharp curve. The woman spoke with a shivering voice, asking the driver to please be careful and slow down since that curve was dangerous. Nacho was puzzled since he wasn't seeing any curve on the road yet and wasn't driving very fast either. Until the sharp curve emerged from the fog and Nacho had no choice but to swerve at the last minute. Fully alert and focused on the road after such a scare, he asked his passenger if she was okay. And that's when a voice behind Nacho said, "This is the curve where I died." A shiver went down Nacho's entire body. He turned his head with a nervous smile, thinking what she said was just a scary joke. But that young woman he picked up a few meters before was no longer there. It's as if she had evaporated. Nacho slammed on the brakes and got off the car. He couldn't understand any of what was going on until he saw a few white flowers by the side of the road with a note that said, "Here lies Teresa Fidalgo." Nacho quickly got back into his car and continued driving, shivering, and constantly looking at his rearview mirror in case that ghost reappeared. He decided he had to go report this at a police station. He spoke with one of the officers to report what he had experienced, and the officer's response completely changed Nacho's expression. The officer said that he was the third person that night who had reported that same event. The officer then turned on his walkie-talkie and with a shivering voice, "The girl on the curve is back." Welcome back, horror lovers. We hope you are doing well, and we hope you're also prepared for today's dose of terror. There's a place where all abandoned toys end up, and it's not the garbage. Someone rescues them from the landfills and takes them to a secret place. There, they meet all kinds of discarded toys and live a happy existence together. However, some toys never forget how they were replaced and thrown to the garbage after providing fun for children for so many years. And the worst part is when their owners grow up and completely forget about them. That was the case of Christy and Ronan, a couple who had been together since they were built. They were exclusive toys built by hand by a great artisan. Their creation was done with so much love that their beauty and their colorful hair were admired by all the children who passed by that toy store. However, they were pretty expensive, and since they were made as a couple, were not being sold separately. After they arrived at that haven of abandoned toys, they sunk into a deep depression and started having serious marital problems. They were obsessed about those moments of joy when they played with the girl they thought were their best friend. That's why Ronan, with his heart filled with pain and anger, wanted to take revenge. Christy felt the same way. Hatred, a feeling which can be as strong as love, corrupted them, and they started to grow in size until they were as tall as an average human. With their newfound size, then they headed to the city's downtown where they were originally built. People were stopping them and asking them to please take photos with them, amazed at how realistic their costumes looked. Guided by the connection they still had with their former owner, they managed to find her house. She was now an adult, was married, and had children of her own. Christy and Ronan grabbed each other's hand and knocked on the door. It was her who opened it, and her jaw dropped when she immediately recognized them. The dolls then cruelly tackled her and tore out her skull with their bare hands. They were then seen walking around holding the head of their former owner, covered in blood and with an evil smirk on their faces. The neighbors called the police, but as much as the agents shot them and pierced their bodies, the dolls kept on walking as if nothing happened. They then went into the toy store where they were originally sold, and the artisan who made them immediately recognized them too. He couldn't understand how it was possible for them to have grown to such a size. And then, the overgrown dolls proceeded to murder in cold blood all of the families in the toy store. Christmas was just a few days away, so the store was packed that day. After the carnage, the dolls kept walking while holding each other's arm. She held the head of their creator in her hand, while he held the head of their former owner in his hand. And as they walked, they kept holding that same cruel, evil, and terrifying smirk. Jenny was a 13-year-old girl. She was very excited because for the first time the circus had come to her town. She had never visited one, so she tried in every way possible to convince her parents to take her. Her family was humble and she didn't have enough savings to pay for 3 tickets. But Jenny was so excited that she used the money she had saved from her birthdays to pay half the price, and the other half her parents would put up to make her happy. That day in the morning, she was so happy that she told the news to all her classmates. Many told her that they would meet there because their parents would also take them. However, one of her best friends, Tom, pouted and told her that he had to talk to her alone. The young man had heard horrible rumors about that circus in nearby towns. Jenny thought he was just jealous that she could go and he couldn't, but she asked what those rumors were about. Tom told her that in the back of the circus, the actors kidnapped children and did horrible things to them. Jenny frowned. She didn't believe anything. When she asked what kind of things it was, the boy told her that he didn't know anything else, only that it was a very dangerous place. Jenny angrily accused him of trying to scare her. The boy, annoyed by her reaction, turned around and left without saying another word. Jenny wasn't going to let her friend spoil her happiness for the day, so when it was time to get out of school, she ran home to get ready for the circus show. The tent was installed in the village forest. Jenny arrived with her parents half an hour before the show, but there was already a long line of people at the box office buying their tickets. While her parents waited for their turn, the young woman approached the side of the tent where she saw several actors pass by who were practicing part of the show. Very excited, she couldn't help herself and went after them. One of the artists realized that the girl was following them, and when his companions were confused, he backed away and approached her stealthily. He told her to get away from there. That was a dangerous place. The actor asked her to return to her parents' side and ran back to his companions. Jenny remembered what her friend Tom had told her at school, so she decided to go back to the entrance. However, when she was walking back, one of the actors got in her way. He asked her where she was going and if she wanted to see some of the animals they kept in their cages. The young woman looked at him with wide eyes and excitedly replied that she would love to see the lion and tiger up close. The actor shook her hand and invited her to enter the tent. Jenny felt that what she was doing was wrong. If her parents didn't find her, they would be distraught. She asked the artist to let her out, but he gripped her hand tighter. The young woman could perceive a rotten smell. In that place, there were many cages, but no animals. She approached one of them and she could see that they were full of human corpses. She started to run towards the exit, but an acrobat with a macabre smile stopped her, tying her up and covering her eyes with a white band. Right after, shouts were heard inside the tent, and the public that was outside in line began to applaud, believing that it was part of the show to create expectation of what they were going to find there. The acrobat put his lips to Jenny's ears and said in a raspy voice, "This is the place that will make you belong to the circus forever. Deformed diva."
Brian was only 6 years old when he was hospitalized for a problem with his little heart. It was very sad to walk through the corridor where several children, instead of being able to play in the park, were locked up between four walls connected to various machines in order to continue breathing. The sanitarians went out of their way to make them happy every day, so the head nurse Alan had an idea. He encouraged his coworkers to dress up as clowns, complete with colorful costumes, wigs, and makeup. In this way, through laughter therapy, they would help all the children in the hospital. In the afternoon, the nurses got dressed and went into different rooms to make the little ones laugh. The head nurse got Brian's room. When the boy heard the sound of the door opening, he jumped out of bed thinking it was his parents. However, when he found himself face to face with the clown, fear seized him, screaming desperately. Alan, wanting to calm the little boy down, approached him and tried to explain that it was just a costume, that he shouldn't be afraid. But the boy was so horrified that he ran to the window, tearing the intravenous line out of his arm with the movement. The head nurse threw himself at him with all his might to go grab him, but the boy, feeling attacked, threw himself out the window, emitting one last deafening scream. The fall from the 5th floor had been deadly. The screams and noises had been heard from everywhere. When other nurses entered the room, they found Alan frozen, staring out the window, and the child's slippers next to the window. The nurse didn't sleep that night, nor would he sleep the following nights. In his mind, he relived the tragic event over and over again. The next day, the news was in all the newspapers in the city, in which he was blamed for the death of little Brian. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the most unrecognizable body of the boy when he was picked up. Weeks later, the nurse on his floor, dressed up as a clown again. Afterwards, he grabbed a bottle and threw it against the wall, breaking it into several pieces. With one of the crystals, a finger was cut, and with the blood that dripped from his hand, he wrote a text on the wall that said, "I killed the boy, and also the clown." Then he jumped out the window of his 5th floor.
Welcome back, horror lovers. Today, we'll be sharing with you the terrible events that a young woman and her daughter had to endure not so long ago. Guadalupe was a single mom. She divorced her husband 3 years back, but fortunately was immensely happy living with her daughter Anna. She also had a good relationship with her ex-husband. The divorce had been friendly, and Anna could visit her father whenever she wanted. For her 6th birthday, little Anna asked for a talking doll as her gift. She saw it in a commercial and was amazed by it. The doll could talk, laugh, and even cry. Little Anna was very obedient and responsible, so when her birthday came, Guadalupe surprised her with the doll she so eagerly wanted. And even though she received more gifts, the doll was her favorite one. So much so that she would carry it everywhere she went. Days passed by, and Guadalupe noticed that even though the doll's box said it could say many different phrases, she was only hearing it repeat the same phrase every time. "Do you want to be my mommy?" She thought the doll was defective. However, her daughter was so happy with it that she decided to just let it be and not take it back to the store. Then one night, while Guadalupe slept, she suddenly felt as if someone just laid down on the bed right next to her. She assumed it was her daughter, who would sometimes have nightmares and come to her bed out of fear of sleeping alone. However, when Guadalupe opened her eyes and turned around, she saw Anna's doll lying right by her side. She got so scared that her scream was heard in the entire house, and a few seconds later, little Anna appeared at her mom's bedroom door. Guadalupe asked her daughter why she had put the doll on the bed, but Anna said that it hadn't been her. The mom tried to just ignore what happened. Maybe Anna was sleepwalking and didn't remember placing the doll there. Guadalupe then invited Anna to get in bed with her so the three could all sleep together. The next day, while Guadalupe was cooking, she started to hear someone crying, and it was coming from her daughter's room. She rushed to see why Anna was crying, but it wasn't Anna. The weeping was coming from the doll. Well, maybe the doll wasn't defective after all, she thought. And now that Guadalupe was upstairs, she went to give her daughter a kiss too, but when she approached her daughter, she saw that she was holding a pair of scissors in her hand and was stabbing her doll in the eye with it. She quickly took away the scissors and scolded her daughter. This was very strange, since Anna had never done anything like that before. "Mom, that doll is evil. She says very mean things and says she's gonna take you away," Anna yelled between screams. Guadalupe decided to take away the doll. It really scared her seeing Anna using scissors like that. She could have gotten hurt. Moreover, the doll now had a pretty grim appearance, with scratches all over the face and a huge hole in one eye. Not wanting to just throw the doll away, Guadalupe decided to stitch a patch on the doll's stubbed eye. "Do you want to be my mommy?" heard Guadalupe behind her as she was walking back to the kitchen. "I will always be your mother, Anna. Even if I scold you, I'll always love you," she responded. That night, Guadalupe once again felt how someone got in the bed lying next to her. And then she heard the voice of her daughter say, "Mommy, help me, please." The mom turned around to hug her, but then she noticed her skin was hard and cold. It was the doll, which was speaking using her daughter's voice. "I told you the doll was evil, Mom, please help me." Guadalupe jumped out of the bed and tried to run away. However, Anna appeared at the bedroom door holding the same pair of scissors from last time and with blood coming out of one eye. Guadalupe stayed there, her daughter's gaze fixed on her. "Do you want to be my mommy?"
Sometimes the human mind can lead us to commit real barbarities, and today we want to tell you about one of those cases. Let's move to Nizhny Novgorod, a Russian city. There, in 2011, different destroyed, looted, and desecrated tombs began to appear. Apparently, there was no link between the families, but the desecrations kept happening. The families were absolutely desperate. At that time, there was a person in the area who had gained fame for the study of municipal cemeteries. He was a historian and loved the occult. His name was Anatoly Moskvin, and together with other colleagues in the early 2000s, he had used statistical and study elements on the causes of deaths of people buried in the region. Their aim was to extract data on most causes of death. He therefore came to call himself a necrologist. This had much to do with his fondness for all things occult. On top of this, he was a professor at the Moscow State University and spoke 13 languages. For all this, in 2011, when the police began investigations into what was going on in the local cemetery, they asked him for help. He, of course, accepted the assignment. But in the midst of the investigations, an officer spotted him after hours in the middle of the cemetery, dragging a large bag. When he opened it, it contained bones. This precipitated the events. The police applied for a warrant to search his house. It was a routine process. They could never have imagined the scene they encountered. Everywhere they looked, there were shelves full of books, toys, and small children's clothes. But that wasn't the worst of it. The most shocking were the dolls. They were perfectly seated or placed in places where children could be. Sofas, beds, carpets. The investigators were struck by something else, the terrible smell in that house. The dolls were large and life-size. When they approached them, they found that it was much worse than they thought. They were hiding behind their clothes and masks the corpses of mummified girls and women. Moskvin confessed to being responsible for some 150 grave desecrations. He stole the corpses of girls and women and mummified them to transform them into dolls. He made each corpse a wax mask and painted its features with nail polish. Each body was dressed differently, as he collected clothes and shoes. To embalm them, he used a mixture of salt and baking soda. In his house, they also found updated information on each girl. He kept a record of their lives and also documented the process of turning them into dolls. He kept pieces of tombstones, photographs, a real horror. In total, the bodies of 26 girls were found inside his house. At no time did Anatoly Moskvin want to deny the facts. What's more, he cooperated with the police, giving all the details about the procedures he used. He said such astonishing things as he tried to resuscitate the girls by placing music boxes inside them. In addition, he used to read them stories or tell them stories. They all had her name and her very definite personality. After investigations, it was learned that her interest in corpses began when she was only 12 years old. At that time, a classmate of hers passed away. Anatoly went to the funeral, and there he was forced to give a kiss to the deceased. That was the beginning of his macabre hobby. During his statements, the Russian claimed to be fully aware that he was committing a crime, but he felt the need to give these girls a second life. He claimed that the dead children would call him. He would go to their graves and ask for permission to dig them up. At that point, he would take them to his house to start the process. At the trial, he himself said in front of the victims' families that he was happy he did it. He believed he could bring the girls back to life through science and black magic. And in conclusion, he said, "You abandoned your girls in the cold. I took them to my house and gave them shelter." Anatoly was declared mentally ill and was committed to a psychiatric clinic, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Don't you think it's terrible what he did?
Welcome back, horror lovers. We hope you're ready for today's terrifying story. And if you decide to watch it alone and with the lights off, you'll surely end up wary of literally everything around you. So do so at your own risk. Juliet saw on TV a commercial where ventriloquists showed up. Ventriloquists are people who have the ability to speak while almost not moving their lips, giving the impression that their words are coming from another source, like a special doll known as a dummy. At first, Juliet thought that the dummy was the one actually talking, but her father told her that it was all an illusion. And when he explained to his daughter how ventriloquism worked, Juliet was fascinated. She was so enthralled that afterwards she would implore her parents day and night to please buy her a dummy so she could practice ventriloquism. However, since her parents were not happy with that idea at all, and because ventriloquist dummies are so expensive, they decided to just buy her a normal doll. And to keep Juliet entertained, they told her that if she built a good relationship with the doll, it would move its lips on its own when Juliet talked. Innocent, Juliet completely believed her parents and was so hopeful that she set herself the goal of becoming her doll's best friend until it finally moved its lips. Juliet would then spend all day with her new partner, which wasn't just a mere toy for her anymore. She would drink hot chocolate with her, talk to her for hours about whatever happened at school, and would even tell her stories. Her parents had never seen their daughter so happy. However, Juliet became aloof towards her parents and also became overly overprotective of her doll. If they asked her to do anything, she would first consult the doll before doing it. She would then imagine an answer and act accordingly. Then one day, Juliet suddenly rushed downstairs, crying of happiness. She explained to her parents that the doll had finally moved its lips, and not only to imitate her, but also to speak. They thought Juliet had gone crazy. And since she had been acting so strange for so long, and they missed so much how Juliet was before having the doll, they decided to grab Juliet's dear friend and throw it in the garbage. They were very worried. So much so that they thought having Juliet see a psychiatrist would be the best option. However, therapy did nothing. Little Juliet stopped speaking, and when she was awake, the only thing she did was cry. Feeling guilty, her father went out to look for the doll, praying that he might be able to find it somewhere. or he would have to buy another doll of the same type. And when the father was about to lose all hope, he saw how a girl was carrying a doll exactly like his daughter's. And he didn't know why, but he was completely sure that that was Juliet's doll, the exact same one he threw in the garbage. He approached the girl and offered to buy it from her. And at first she hesitated, but the girl eventually accepted. He then brought the doll home and gave it to her daughter, who received it with a huge smile on her face. He saw how Juliet's expression changed completely. She started speaking again and thanked her father for bringing the doll back. And then, a couple of weeks later, the parents appeared on TV. Juliet had murdered them, claiming that the doll had instructed her to kill them. It was the year 1996, and the television commercials showed the recent Nintendo 64 with its flagship game, Mario 64. Bob, 35 years old, was a lover of video game consoles. It was his passion since he was a child. He couldn't wait to get his hands on the new release, even though the console hadn't even gone on sale in the stores yet. However, this night could be very special. In his city, a television program had organized an event in which a Nintendo 64 with the Mario game would be raffled. It was one of the few consoles that the company had distributed to various sectors to create expectation for future customers. Bob had registered online and had managed to participate in the event. He arrived at the chain's facilities 2 hours early, and he wasn't the only one, because there was a large group of children and teenagers at the door. During the wait, he felt somewhat irritated and indignant at the reaction of the other participants. Almost everyone looked at him as if they were facing an alien. "Aren't you too old for this?" a boy of 15 or 16 dared to say to him. "At your age, I would already have children and a wife," he heard another whisper behind his back. Bob just bit his tongue so as not to risk being expelled before entering. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you were waiting for has finally arrived, said the presenter opening his program. After which, a contest began in which the ability and knowledge that the participants had in relation to various games were tested. Finally, after a tough competition, there were 5 finalists, among whom was Bob and the daughter of the show's producer. A girl of about 14, red-headed and chubby, with big horn-rimmed glasses. Bob didn't know who her father was, that he had rigged almost everything for her to win. In the last part of the contest, there were 5 sections and the participants had to choose one at random. Behind each block, there was always a prize. And that's when Bob noticed that the presenter always showed a number from 1 to 5 with his right hand to the red-haired girl. She was doing it downwards, and his movements seemed somewhat spontaneous, but it hadn't gone unnoticed by Bob, who realized that he was telling the girl what theme to choose. When the girl won, Bob lost control and said everything he saw out loud. The audience was silent, looking at him, but they all laughed out loud when the presenter told him in a fake joking tone, "Come on, man, it's just a game. You will have the opportunity to buy your own console later. I'm sure you can buy it yourself and you won't have to ask your parents for it." Bob got even angrier with those words, so the presenter approached him, turning his back to the audience and covering his microphone, said, "Hey, I think you're right. You deserved that console, but I have another one. Don't worry. I just have to ask them to bring it to me, so wait for me outside and I'll bring it to you." Patiently, Bob waited in the street until 11:30 p.m. It was already very late and he saw that they were closing all the facilities. So he approached the gate guard and told him what happened on the show. The man told him he was sorry, but he could not let him in. Just at that moment, the presenter with other guards passed by the side of the door. Bob shouted at him from the door, claiming the promised prize. However, he sneered at him and said that he was impressed that he had fallen for such a simple lie and trap. Bob realized that the presenter had only told him this to keep him off the set and avoid a scandal on air. He lost control and began to insult him, but the presenter ordered his guards to take him away from there and threatened him with a severe beating if he dared to appear there again. For a long time, no one ever heard from Bob again until they hosted a costume contest on the same show. Taking advantage of the occasion to remind the presenter what made him suffer the night of the contest, Bob dressed up as Mario. However, his suit was torn and covered in blood and dirt. He had also painted his face, simulating bruises and wounds. During the program, at a time when the presenter was speaking, Bob stood behind him, putting him in a very uncomfortable situation. Since the show was broadcasted live, the presenter pretended to be in a good mood and said, "Look, our friend Mario seems to be very excited about our costume contest. Let's see, Mr. Plumber, tell us what encourages you to get in front of the cameras tonight." Bob was silent for a few seconds, causing the presenter more discomfort, and then, in a soft voice, he said, "Tonight, I'm going to kill you and your family." In that instant, he recognized the man's voice and goosebumps rose. The presenter was going to use the humorous tone, as he always did, to make the audience laugh at Bob's words. But suddenly, all the lights inexplicably went out for 10 seconds, and when everything lit up again, Bob was no longer there. Frightened by the threats, the presenter asked some guards to go to his house to check that his family was okay. Arriving home, he greeted his daughter with a kiss on the forehead. The young woman who had seen the program was worried, but her father assured her that no one would harm her. He had hired a couple of chained guards to watch the house that night. A couple of hours after he fell asleep, the presenter woke up agitated when he heard a loud noise. When he entered the room, he couldn't believe it. The furniture and the television were smashed, the guards were dead, and on the wall was written in blood in large letters, "It's me, Mario." Those were the words that the character said in the Mario 64 game. The man rubbed his eyes, trying to believe that it was all a dream, but everything was the same. Face pale, he ran back to his room. In his bed was the head of his wife, and the body was on the floor. The presenter was crying and screaming on his knees with his face in his hands. Unfortunately, the worst part of the nightmare was yet to come. "Dad!" his daughter yelled. The man ran to the girl's room and found her dying on the floor with her chest open and the Nintendo 64 embedded. Next to her was Bob in his bloody Mario costume, carrying a huge dagger. In those moments, terror outweighed anger, and the presenter ran. People say that Bob chased him into a ravine and that the presenter fell there, breaking his leg and finally being killed by his pursuer. The last that was heard of Bob was that the police entered his house and found a Nintendo 64 turned on, and a Mario that inexplicably returned to die on the screen over and over again with a background melody. Welcome, horror lovers. We bet you've heard many scary legends about abandoned buildings inhabited by ghosts of the past. Many of these end up being demolished, while others, like the building today's protagonist was in, are renovated and open once more their terrifying doors. A lot of time had passed, and Rose still couldn't find a job as a nurse. It was pretty difficult due to her lack of education and experience. And every year, things would get more and more complicated. She was about 40 years old and was a careful and competent professional, but always had in front of her either young women with scholarships looking to start their training, or veterans who were way more skilled than her. She started to give up and stay at home, feeling depressed. Her husband, Jack, also felt terrible due to her situation. Fortunately, he had a stable job in IT, and even though they could both live with his income, he knew this situation was torture for her. Rose could end up developing a disorder, or even worse, wandering around like a soul in torment. Being a nurse, and especially taking care of others, had been her dream since she was young. One day, Jack had a bit of a strange idea, which he had to try now as a last resort. He heard that the old mental home at the city outskirts had been renovated. A while ago, they used to receive the most severe cases of schizophrenia and psychosis, but had to close it down due to lack of resources. However, they had renovated it into a modern hospital with the latest technology ready to open again. He went to the management office with Rose to make them an extraordinary proposal. She would work there for free for the first 3 months, and if she managed to prove her value as a nurse, they would hire her full-time. And if she didn't, she would simply leave without saying a word. Rose was very surprised, but thought the idea wasn't bad at all. Quite the contrary. She preferred to help others instead of staying at home doing nothing, even if she wasn't paid for now. And thus, that's how she could finally get a job as a nurse, and in one of the most prestigious medical centers of the region. The entire complex had 5 floors, but only 4 were currently functioning. The 3rd floor was still under construction and still conserved some remains of its sinister past. When Rose was on call, she would sometimes walk around there, feeling strangely attracted to the rooms in ruins, with cushioned walls and beds with straps. Weeks passed by and she started to feel very hopeful, and soon enough, the management team told her how satisfied they were with her work, as well as the patients. They were so happy with her that they finally decided to hire her permanently and would even pay her for the month she had already worked in there, and she deserved it. The renovations on the 3rd floor were almost complete. It would start being used soon and the hospital needed more stuff. That was when, in the middle of a night when she was on call, she heard how she was called over the loudspeakers. She had to clean a mess on one of the rooms in the 3rd floor. That was weird, since that wasn't exactly part of her job and the 3rd floor wasn't in use yet. She couldn't recognize that voice either. It sounded so gruff and deep that she was sure she hadn't heard it before. However, willing to help, she obeyed the voice. When she arrived, it seemed that nobody was on the floor and all the hallways were dark, even though she thought she heard murmurs on the other side. In the dark, she tried to find the light switches, but when she tried to turn them on, there was no electricity. It was also very cold since all the windows were broken. Many times she asked out loud if someone was there, but nobody responded, so she decided to return to her usual position. On her way back, she went to the management office to ask why she was instructed to go there. But the response they gave her left her very perplexed. They told her that nobody had called her. In fact, nobody even heard the loudspeakers. They all seemed to be as puzzled as she was, but then Rose thought that maybe they were just playing a prank on her for being near and tried to just forget about it. It could also be that she heard wrong or that her imagination was playing tricks on her. It was 3 in the morning and she was very tired. Fortunately, she was assigned a new assistant, Jenny, a young woman excited to learn by her side and who soon became her friend. Rose felt safer with Jenny, although Jenny had kind of an eccentric hobby. She liked to talk about urban legends and mysterious cases. Thanks to Jenny, Rose learned the terrifying truth about the old building they were now working in. The former mental home had been closed down due to horrible abuses by the staff on the patients. Some cases were so extreme that the staff would confine the patients for days and would even leave them immobilized in their beds, forgetting about them afterwards. They would even beat the ones who were more hysterical to calm them down or would leave them without food for days. It was a pretty grim picture. The mental home was crammed with patients who would wander the hallways with no supervision while the staff became overwhelmed and lost their humanity. It was a nightmare, one that would fortunately never happen again because the new center now had enough resources, as well as excellent workers such as Rose. And there was Jenny too, who turned out to be the perfect helper. However, one fateful night while Rose and Jenny were having a break together, that sinister voice sounded again through the loudspeakers. It called Rose again, this time to room 33 in the 3rd floor, while sending her partner Jenny to a different place. That was strange because even though the renovation of the floor was finished, it was still unoccupied. Intrigued, Jenny decided to go with Rose. However, when they were halfway there, as if the voice was observing them, it once again ordered Jenny to go somewhere else. And so, Rose had to keep going to room 33, alone. This time around, the hallways were illuminated with a dim light, but there was still nobody inside. She arrived at room 33 and slowly opened the door, as if she didn't want to wake up whoever was inside. And in fact, there was actually a patient there, lying on the bed. However, there were no machines around him and no relative or friend staying with him. Worried about the patient, Rose asked for permission to come in and turned on the light. However, what she saw left her frozen in shock. The walls had a new cushioning as if it had been renovated, but that made no sense since they no longer took care of mental patients in that medical center. There were also a lot of scratches on the cushions as well as bits of blood. She started to get scared, but even then she approached the patient to see if he needed her help. The texture of his skin was a bit strange with a yellowish tone. His eyes were closed, so she tried to call him softly. Since he wasn't responding, she walked towards him, and she suddenly started to experience a strange sensation. She tried to come closer, but with each step, she noticed the patient was getting farther and farther away from her, to the point that she started to get exasperated. She felt panic and wanted to run towards the door. However, when she turned around, she noticed she had never left her initial position. She looked at the patient once again and felt deep pity for him due to his terrible state. And thus, she mustered all the courage she could and with determination tried to reach once again the patient's bed to see what was going on. And this time around, she actually managed to reach it. However, when she looked at the patient, what she saw petrified her in horror. She could barely contain a scream. When she touched the hand of the patient, she noticed that it was completely cold, with no life. She didn't need to take his pulse to know he was dead. And even then, suddenly, the patient reacted and opened its eyes. Rose didn't know if he was looking at her since its eyes were completely black as midnight. However, she could see herself reflected in those eyes. Shocked beyond belief, Rose let go of the hand of that patient and wanted to run back to the door. But it slammed shut on its own, confining her there. Terrorized, she slowly turned around to the bed once more. Now the bed was empty and the bed sheets were scrambled as if the patient had gotten up hastily. She tried to search for him around her, but the darkness of the room barely allowed her to distinguish the corners. She then heard a hoarse and deep whisper coming from a voice she immediately recognized. "You're just like the others. You're going to abandon me here. But now, you will never get out." Meanwhile, going back to her post, Jenny heard a scream coming from the third floor. Fearing for Rose, she rushed to room 33, but when she arrived, she turned on the lights and noticed nothing strange. The walls were smooth, recently painted with an immaculate color, and the modern beds were ready to be used. She searched the entire floor for Rose but couldn't find her, and thus Rose was never seen again. That fateful night, she had disappeared forever. Hello, horror lovers. Welcome to today's dose of daily horror. Today, we'll share with you a horrifying story that took place in Madrid 10 years ago. The protagonist is Juan, a calm and shy kid who always looked forward for his classes to end so he could spend hours and hours playing his video games. The school year had just started and only 1 week had passed. Juan was new in that school. It was difficult for him to connect with others and nobody even knew his name. He was enduring one more boring morning on his desk and couldn't think of anything besides going back home to play his video games. He had math, English, Spanish, and finally chemistry. And when the bell rang, indicating that the children could finally go home, he rushed out of there without even thinking. However, in the middle of his way back home, he started to feel cold. Indeed, he had left his coat in the classroom. He knew his parents would ground him if he came back without his coat, so he turned back and rushed to the school, hoping his lunch at home wouldn't get cold. He went into the classroom, grabbed his coat, and when he turned around to close the door, he found a notebook thrown by the side of the trash bin. He quickly grabbed it and looked for a name on the cover. Maybe if he figured out who was the owner, he could become friends with that person. He found no names on the cover, so he opened the first page where he found 2 last names, Martinez Alvarez. Since he knew he wouldn't be able to ask who was the owner due to his shyness, he went to see if the principal was still there. Juan went into his office and asked the principal if he knew anyone with the last names Martinez Alvarez. But he didn't remember anyone having those 2 last names in years. Which was very strange, since the principal knew every student who was currently going to that school. Intrigued, the principal then decided to verify the registries, checking year after year, and feeling more and more puzzled as he went on. He concluded that there had been no student with those 2 last names in the last 25 years, which is precisely when Juan's mother studied there. It was a former student who, out of the blue and with no previous notice, moved away with his entire family. So much time had passed that his name was barely legible in the registries. Juan finally arrived home, and after being scolded for arriving late and after his lunch got cold, he asked his mother about what the principal had said. She perfectly remembered the last names Martinez Alvarez and even described his face. In fact, her son was physically similar to the image she remembered, but she had forgotten the first name completely. As much as she tried to remember, she couldn't remember that first name. However, what she did manage to remember was the last day of Martinez Alvarez. It was a very normal day. He was a very quiet child who never caused trouble in class. She never saw him having a conversation with anyone either, unless it was to answer a question from a teacher. Then one day, in the last period, he asked to go to the toilet and never came back. Nobody knew what happened to him, and after calling his family for days and hearing nothing back, they simply assumed that he suddenly had to move due to circumstances beyond their control, and nobody ever talked about that again. The next morning, Juan took the notebook to class and spent the whole day looking at its pages. He didn't know why he hadn't done that before. All the exercises were complete and impeccable, just like his. And in that moment, due to the uncertainty of not knowing the name of Martinez Alvarez, and out of impulse, he wrote in the notebook right before those 2 last names, Juan Martinez Alvarez. Then the last period came, and although he went to the toilet during recess, he suddenly felt an urgent need to go again. So, before the teacher started the class, he approached him with embarrassment and asked him if he could go. As soon as Juan heard yes, he rushed to the toilet, leaving his backpack in the classroom. He had been checking the notebook during his change of classes, and without realizing it, he had brought the notebook with him. There, the last place where Martinez Alvarez ever was in, was also the last place Juan ever was in. Nobody ever heard from Juan nor his family again. Everyone assumed that he simply moved out due to circumstances beyond their control. And eventually, everyone forgot his name. John and Candice were deeply in love with each other since they were teenagers. When they were young, they would constantly tell each other how much they needed one another and how much they wanted to grow up and start a family together. A few years later, after they both finished their studies and found jobs, they moved in together. They already knew what their perfect house would look like, and even though it was quite expensive, they could afford to buy it by combining their salaries. Just a few months later, they decided to have a child. Candice got pregnant. The doctor told them it would be a girl, and so the couple went shopping, spending the remainder of their savings in decorations for their future daughter's room. They arrived back home late and feeling exhausted, so they had a quick dinner and immediately after went to bed. Then, a few hours later, Candice woke up in a sweat, terrified and panicked. She had a nightmare where she died during labor. John hugged Candice, trying to console her, but the nightmare felt so real that even days after it happened, fear still invaded her mind. Thus, she resorted to talking to a psychologist to help her. After a few sessions, she managed to fend off those ugly thoughts of her head and her happiness came back. Unfortunately, during her last weeks of pregnancy, Candice fell ill. She started feeling weaker and weaker, and no matter how many tests they did on her at the hospital, the staff couldn't figure out what was wrong. Eventually, Candice had to be hospitalized. John would spend every night after work with her at the hospital, and he witnessed firsthand how her condition got progressively worse. The few times Candice talked, she said she did not want to die without seeing her daughter grow up. And when it seemed that Candice was getting better, she fell into a deep coma. She took a long time to wake up and would give birth pretty soon. She had nurses checking on her at all times in case she relapsed, even though she seemed to be recovering. And suddenly, one day, Candice felt a piercing pain in her belly. She was about to give birth. She had no strength left, not even to scream due to the pain. But even then, they finally heard how a baby's crying filled the room. John, who was firmly holding Candice's hand, noticed how she instantly lost all the strength she had left. There was no doubt about it. Candice had passed away. The staff quickly took the baby and left John alone with his former wife to say his goodbyes. The baby was precious. She had the same blue eyes as her mother, and unlike other newborns, her silence and calmness really stood out. She was constantly smiling, and everyone who saw her felt like pinching her little cheeks. However, for John, looking at his daughter was torture. The baby's gaze was just like Candice's, and constantly reminded him of how much he missed her. He couldn't avoid thinking that if he had stopped the pregnancy somehow, his dear wife would still be alive. John became so obsessed with that idea that hate started to appear in his heart. However, she was still his daughter, and John also realized that she also represented whatever was left of his wife. With so many conflicting ideas constantly clashing in his mind, John reached the edge of insanity just a few days later. He decided that Candice would see her little daughter grow up one way or another. Thus, one night, he put on a mask, grabbed a shovel, and drove to the graveyard. Once there, he knelt in front of his wife's grave, and after asking God for forgiveness, he started to dig. After a while of digging, the shovel hit something hard, the lid of the coffin. He removed all of the dirt around the lid and uncovered the coffin. There was Candice's body, pretty much intact. He was shocked at seeing her corpse and how pale it was, but somehow she still looked as beautiful as he remembered. He opened the chest of Candice's corpse and extracted her heart. In tears, John sealed back the coffin and covered it in dirt again. He then put Candice's heart in a bag, rushed to his car, and drove back home. Once he arrived back, John went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and opened one of the teddy bears he had bought for his newborn daughter. He placed Candice's heart inside the adorable plushie and then stitched it back up so it wouldn't get out. John then went to his daughter's bedroom. She was asleep. He placed the teddy bear next to her in the crib, and in that moment, she woke up. Her reaction was to grab the teddy bear and hug it. She fell asleep again in just a few seconds. When John was about to leave the bedroom, he started to hear really strange noises. They sounded like thuds that got increasingly louder. He tried to pay close attention to detect where they were coming from, and he realized that they were coming from inside the teddy bear. John thought he was just imagining things due to how exhausted he was, so he chose to just leave the bedroom, carefully closing the door to not wake up his daughter. And as he walked out of the room, he recognized a familiar voice. It was Candice's voice singing a lullaby. John quickly turned around, went back into his daughter's bedroom, and what he witnessed froze him in shock. His daughter was being embraced by some sort of creature with the shape of a woman, but made entirely of what seemed to be veins. He recognized Candice's silhouette and started to slowly approach her. As much as he talked to her, she didn't seem to be listening. And once he got really close to her, The creature produced such a loud and horrifying scream that it made John run away from the room in terror. The bedroom's door then slammed shut on its own, and John heard a metallic sound behind, indicating that someone had locked the door. He tackled the door many times as hard as he could, trying to knock it down, but gave up once he realized it was futile. John once again heard Candace's sweet voice singing a lullaby inside the room. He convinced himself he was delirious, and as he walked into his own bathroom, he lost consciousness and fainted. He hit his face really hard when he fell to the floor, and while he was unconscious, John dreamed that Candace was still alive and that they were taking a walk with her daughter. He was feeling really happy while they walked through a beautiful garden while pushing a baby stroller. However, all of a sudden, the baby started crying more and more loudly, until Candace, in a fit of rage, cruelly killed her daughter by tearing out her little heart with her bare hand. Meanwhile, John could only witness that gruesome scene, unable to move or scream. He woke up from that nightmare and noticed a warm liquid on his face. He opened his eyes, got up, and saw it was a red liquid. He saw a trail coming from his daughter's room. The liquid was coming from under the door, forming a tiny rivulet. John went again to his daughter's bedroom, still dazed and not understanding what was happening. He grabbed the doorknob and managed to open the door easily. He turned on the lights and once again saw that veiny creature holding his baby. He was petrified, staring directly at that monster that somehow resembled Candace. He tried to advance towards it, but he lost control of his body. And a few seconds later, the lights started to turn on and off intermittently. John couldn't see anything. Then he suddenly heard once again Candace's voice singing the same lullaby. Once it was over, he felt dizzy, but came out of his shock thanks to the heart-wrenching cries of his daughter. He recovered his strength and rushed to the crib. When he looked over it, he saw the teddy bear, which was now completely torn apart. The baby's crib was covered in blood, but there was no sign of his daughter nor Candace's heart. Following his instincts, John rushed to his car and drove to the graveyard. Once there, he rushed to his wife's grave and was shocked to discover that someone had dug it out once again, leaving the coffin exposed. Fearing the worst, John removed the coffin's wooden lid and saw how Candace's corpse was now embracing the corpse of his baby daughter. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life horror videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode.